Hey, what's wrong?
The monsters forced us to work in the mines. As slaves, everyone else died from exhaustion.
What's wrong? Oh, I'm a slave dying of exhaustion. Wow, yeah, I guess that is pretty bad. Onimusha 2 might have the comfiest opening hours in any action game.
His strength restored, Nobunaga was set to conquer the entire country.
Jubei Yagyu arrives home to find his village has been attacked by Oda Nobunaga's evil forces. His warm home transformed into a cold, heartless wreckage. The dark clouds, rain, and subtle background music provide an ominous mood as Jubei investigates what happened. After uncovering the truth, Jubei sets out on a quest for revenge, and we transition to his arrival in Imasho village, where he intends to investigate further. Cutting from the harsh, desolate, downcast corpse of Yagyu village to this sunny, bustling town feels like coming in from out of the rain, out of the cold and into the warmth. Sure, there are scoundrels about in this gold-obsessed mining town, but Imasho is a much more safe and hospitable area than you're likely to find in most hardcore action games. Smelling a lead, Jubei heads for the town mines, where Oda's demons are causing chaos, and on the way is ambushed by his forces. The game sets the mood so right here by providing no music for this moment, letting the setting speak for itself as you do battle in this scenic bit of Japanese countryside. The lack of musical embellishments complementing the grace and finesse of samurai swordplay. The fixed camera shots offer this voyeuristic quality to the fights, like you're peeking through the bushes to catch a glimpse of the battle. Onimusha uses pre-rendered backgrounds like the original, and the game will cut between different still angles as you move around, very rarely tracking the player with a short pan. One of the last major releases to make use of this style. The results are really impressive, allowing for some stunning detail on PS2 that brings to life 1500s Japan, from the lush to the grimy to the macabre and fantastical. It's really a game though where it's hard to experience it at its best without a CRT display. The low resolution of the backgrounds can be plain to see on modern monitors, which isn't the case on CRT. The analog display the game was meant to be seen through softens the image, bridging the gap between the photoreal pre-renders and 3D character models for a cohesive diorama. That said, it still looks pretty great no matter how you view it, as long as you don't stick it through an emulator or something and make the 3D characters way higher res than the backgrounds. The fixed angles become part of the style, framing the combat in a cool and constantly changing array of ways. But you know all that. The question is, how well does the approach serve swordplay in this game, as opposed to a survival horror game with guns? Sometimes a fixed angle is exactly what you need for a consistent, solid view of action. Sometimes it's not, and Onimusha fluctuates between the two recklessly. Combat will happen at angles that will make passing out the action tricky. It can be frustrating and annoying, but also, I wouldn't really have it any other way here. Yeah, we can make the argument that combat should be restricted to wide open views that present the action very clearly, but is that what we want, really? To have the edges sanded off the game where you know if you're in a tight space or cramped corner you're safe because the game doesn't want to do you dirty? Kind of lessens the thrill of the adventure. The nooks and crannies of Onimusha 2 are offered their ambience in great part because danger could be lurking, in contrast to your only safe haven, the village of Imasho, where you can make use of a shop and talk to the various characters you meet along the way, stress-free. It quickly becomes a homely setting, while the dangerous areas feel all the more dangerous. I don't want to play a version of Onimusha 2 where a cramped, dark, chilling space doesn't have the potential to be dangerous, especially with how the pre-renders help the environments drip with mood. The big addition from the original Onimusha is the new character relationship system that the game doesn't give you much information about, but the surprise in how it unfolds just adds to its appeal. At the start of the game, you'll quickly be introduced to other warriors traveling the lands, and you can offer them gifts either bought at the shop or found in the levels. You'll have to guess based on their personality and tastes what gifts they'll like, to tease a good reward out of them. As a kid, I enjoyed experimenting just to see the reaction you could get out of each character, positive or otherwise.
That junk's for old folks.
Especially when they start throwing magic mushrooms into the mix.
Wow, how amazing!
This book is huge.
It's a novel way to get you involved with the characters of a game, to try and gauge their interests, to get good resources.
Wonderful! Board spirits are always enjoyable!
It makes for a fresh way to acquire new items beyond just spending money at the store for those resources like it would be in any other game. It goes beyond item acquisition though. Befriend a character enough with gifts they like and they have a chance of showing up mid-battle to help you out. Even wearing items you've bought them. They might lend you a special tool to find a secret, or become playable in entirely optional side quests. The fact that the game doesn't tell you this is happening is really cool, makes it feel far more organic than having clearly marked diverging points or dialogue choices. Maybe you had a hunch something was going on, but didn't know for sure until the game confirmed it at the end, revealing a big flowchart to you showing everything that could be possible. An awesome surprise to encourage going back. I think that's better than being offered clear choices and already on your first playthrough, anticipating you'll have to go through again to see everything. Here you get to relax and soak in that first playthrough without that gnawing at you. Before the reveal, there was maybe much more behind the scenes. What's also cool is that how much a character likes you will depend on how friendly you are to them, but some of them also aren't keen on each other.
Are you still in one piece?
Like in this playthrough, I gave Magoichi, the traveling gunman, a bunch of good items, but Eke, the greedy monk, hates him and went on to disappear from the game entirely. Bumping into these guys while on your journey makes it feel like they're just out here doing their own thing too, and the fact your actions will affect if they even stick around in the game at all is really neat. O2 has a bigger game world than the first, although it does recycle a great deal of the original's layout to pull that off. That said, it's a much juicier, more well-rounded game where you travel to more distant places and encounter more quirky characters, and there's a few extra abilities thrown into the mix. Changing weapons in this game is quite the ordeal, but it's funny how it encourages you to do it by giving each weapon independent magic pools, so you're bound to switch out occasionally in a pinch just to deal more magic damage, which hits pretty hard. Onimusha 2 is still largely operating on Resident Evil rules though, as the difficulty of the final boss will range from not too much of a problem to almost impossible depending on how many resources you have when you get there. And if you're lacking, it might be time for a restart or difficulty drop. Something that could have alleviated the potential frustration of this is a more interconnected world to maybe backtrack around to restock on stuff. Oddly, the world is pretty interconnected, and you do have the choice to do that from time to time. You're just presented with a lot of points of no return as well. It's weird because you spend the first few hours of the game going back and forth between the village and the dangerous outskirts. So you think this is sort of going to be the game's rhythm, where we venture out, accomplish some stuff, and then return to use the store and talk to the other characters. But no, after about 4 visits, interact with this demon lady, and with little warning, you're whisked away for the rest of the game, never to return here. That means the currency system disappears from the game too. You collect gold before you leave town for good, but once you do, you never collect any again. Again, it's strange, because any unspent gold will just sit useless in your inventory at this point for the rest of the game, never to be used. Such a pity. That town was obsessed with gold, and Jubei couldn't care less. Yet if you're thorough enough, he ends up becoming the most successful gold digger that town has ever seen. Second only to Oyu here. Well, not everyone has a castle. Sorry, the desecrated remains of my ancestral home just isn't good enough. At this point, since there's no home base anymore to speak to characters in, your character alignments are also pretty much locked in, as you'll have to rely on bumping into them mid-level to stand the chance of affecting any outcomes again. It becomes hard to strategize with the gift system beyond this point. Seems like a waste, and that more could have been done with this hub area. The main indication you get that the town is getting removed from the game is that the shopkeeper says he's thinking of closing up soon before you leave for the final time. Well shit, how come he knows there's a point of no return coming up? Does he work at Capcom too? Nevertheless, I still enjoyed the town area while it lasted, and in general, of course, the extra abilities, characters, and relationship systems are good additions. Onimusha 2 is classic, with a capital H, no doubt. But I'm gonna have to catch it out, because this is definitely a game that builds around the core gameplay of the original, rather than really taking the core mechanics anywhere that new. The combat is still largely just about dodging left or right, blocking, and performing counterattacks, with a few special moves thrown into the mix, punctuated uniquely in Onimusha by having to decide wisely when to hold circle to absorb the quickly vanishing resources enemies drop. One of the relatively bigger additions to combat is the inclusion of the Onimusha transformation, which lets Jubei power up if he acquires 5 purple souls from enemies. Purple souls move a little slower towards Jubei than the others when he's absorbing stuff, so it's possible to strategize and wait for the right moment to absorb the final one. It's not exactly a huge game changer though. Onimusha 2 seems to struggle with where to take its simple but satisfying samurai combat, so instead it adds on other adventure game features like the character relationship system, and a big hammer. But the first Onimusha was a pretty short game, so in this case I don't see much wrong with them basically making a bigger version of it to throw down in, with more bells and whistles along the way, especially releasing only 1 year after the last game. Played after the first title, the game won't be blowing your mind with innovation, but it doesn't feel redundant either. Where the game loses me a little bit is in some of its attempts to vary up the setting. The demons in Onimusha possess advanced technology they pass on to humans, meaning they have mechanical devices and TV monitors and robots, and this stuff totally takes me out of the cool Japanese samurai with a fantasy twist setting when you start fighting goofy assembly line drones. Thankfully, the game has a lot of really sick foes as well to make up for it.
You will die!
Shit, that went hard.
You will die!
And like, damn, was that an elephant? Towards the end, they start really going for it in terms of making this a grisly, demonic setting, which is awesome. I'll say I prefer when the soundtrack is being subtle or just letting the sounds of the gameplay and environment do the work here. Because when the soundtrack gets loud, it's a bit generic and obvious. Like when you switch characters to Oyu and she has this blaring triumphant theme playing the entire time. Just chill out! Also joining the cool enemy roster is this game's rival character who shows up multiple times. Gogen Dantes, the greatest I'll let him say it.
Greatest swordsman of all demons.
Whatever.
He's a demon, but strangely doesn't seem that bothered by whatever Oda Nobunaga is doing or furthering the interests of the demons. He just wants a good fight with you and doesn't seem all that bothered about killing you.
It's been a while since I've encountered someone like you. My sword is trembling with tears of excitement. So...
Even Jubei kind of warms up to him by the end. He's just here to have a good time. Feels like I should have been able to up my social link with him too. It's fair to say this isn't the most compelling plot in the world, but there's enough fun characters and well-realized locations to keep you entertained. It's a colorful world and the cheesy dialogue is charming.
Try to come back from that.
Once in a while though, it does veer into the serious.
Oh, my baby. My baby.
The scene where Eke has a PTSD breakdown over the death of his daughter has always stuck with me.
Please, take great care of her.
You think he's just going to be the comedy relief, but he's actually one of the more tragic characters of the story. He's a fun presence, but with some added depth, a highlight of the story. This game is full of charm. Released at the tail end of the pre-rendered background era, it's a novelty just to play an action game in this style today. But is my praise for that style just nostalgia speaking? Earlier I said that I'm willing to overlook some frustrating encounters for the sake of that style, and you may have been plotting your own swordsman countermove to that argument since, for letting Onimusha 2 off like that. Hand poised, hovering over your sword's hilt, you may want to make the quite valid assertion that fixed pre-rendered backgrounds for an action game are just fundamentally a poor idea if we can only make certain fights fair. and we just have to accept that fights that take place in some locations in the title are going to be potentially frustrating. Yeah, you might be right about that. Though even then, I'd like you to keep in mind that Onimusha 2 isn't a game purely about combat. It's got exploration, those RPG character elements, plenty of puzzles. Style and atmosphere are important here, even if combat potentially suffers from time to time. Some action games don't give you control of the camera, but have 3D environments that camera can track you more easily and dynamically through. Others sometimes give you control, or complete control at all times, but everything comes with its pros and cons. Track a player in a 3D environment, and it's undeniable you can facilitate grander levels with greater scope, but you lose the cool visual style and detail of the pre-renders to facilitate a presentation style that can't do much more to accommodate good combat visibility in cramped areas. And giving the player camera control can still result in some awful framing, when few of the options provided give a good viewpoint anyway, or can make the fight cumbersome if having to find the right one in time distracts you from the battle. Yes, every choice has its downsides, but there's no surprise we live in a world where Onimusha 2's style got phased out. Because if you're making a game like this, it's always better to keep the player doubting whether the camera angle being bad was actually maybe just their own fault. If they have no control of the camera, bad framing will always be the game's fault in the player's eyes. Hence why games like this ended up getting badly received over time, especially as second analog sticks became a console standard and became synonymous with camera control. Have a player falter when presented with a bad angle, and they're gonna wonder if failure could have been prevented if that second analog stick had let them move their view. It's just a shame that trends are exactly that, trends. You end up living in these eras where one type of style is deemed acceptable or profitable, and I get how we get there. Sure, looking back now, Onimusha 2 represents nothing but charm, but I get that after 5+ years of this style, getting smacked across the face between camera cuts once again, and yet another release back then would have started to turn one against pre-rendered backgrounds. The problem is, games take so long to make now that trends, instead of lasting 5 years, last double that. You're waiting 10 years for a shake-up or someone to go back and play around again with an older style. So in this environment, anything with a AAA feel that breaks the mold is almost impossible to shut up about. They seem like miracles. The fact is, yeah, there's a lot of action games pre-rendered backgrounds wouldn't work for. I couldn't imagine Bayonetta being in that style, but a classy, slow-paced, tense samurai game is another story. And Onimusha 2 is one of the best. The setting, the style, the mood, the feel, when it's at its best here, is nailed in a way that I can't see being recaptured now with today's design philosophies.